A Bolivian-registered aircraft was preparing for a flight to Colombia, carrying not just ordinary passengers, but an entire football team about to play the most important match in its history. Their destination was Medellín, where an international final awaited them, a game that could forever change the club's future. As night fell over the Andes Mountains, the calm of the journey would soon turn into uncertainty. First came an eerie silence, then a chain of errors, oversights, and poor decisions that no one could reverse. Meanwhile, on the ground, the sports world was about to receive a devastating blow. We go back to November 28, 2016, at Viru Viru International Airport in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia. It is 6 in the evening, and LaMia Flight 2933 is preparing for departure. Passengers and crew are already on board, and the aircraft is ready to taxi to the assigned runway. This service was planned as a direct charter flight between Viru Viru SLVR and Jose Maria Cordova International Airport, SKRG, which serves Medellín. The distance is approximately 1,600 nautical miles, a route that puts the aircraft right at the limit of its range without refueling. Originally, a fuel stop at Cobija was considered, but that option was dismissed due to the airport's closing time. The idea was to take off in the late afternoon, cross Brazilian airspace non-stop, overfly the Amazon rainforest, and then enter Colombia to descend through the mountains into Medellín. On board were 77 people, 68 passengers, and 9 crew members. Among them was the Brazilian football club Chapecoense, traveling to play the final of the Copa Sudamericana against Atlético Nacional. Also on board were executives, coaching staff, journalists, and support personnel. For the city of Chapeco, this flight represented the dream of seeing their team compete for a continental title for the very first time. The team had chartered this flight with LaMia after Brazil denied authorization for the airline to operate the route directly from São Paulo due to bilateral restrictions. As an alternative, the delegation first flew with Boliviana de Aviation to Santa Cruz, where they boarded LaMia's RJ-85. The aircraft chosen for this mission was an Avro RJ-85, registration CP2933, a regional jet with 4 engines, designed to operate on short runways and at high-altitude airports. It had been stored between 2010 and 2013 until LaMia acquired it. At the time, it was 17 years old and had previously flown for Mesaba Airlines and CityJet. LaMia, Línea Aérea Mérida Internacional de Aviación, was a small airline based in Bolivia, but with Venezuelan origins, known for operating charter flights for football teams and national squads. Its operational history was short and often controversial. Commanding the flight was Captain Miguel Alejandro Quiroga, 36 years old, a former Bolivian Air Force pilot, flight instructor, and co-owner of the airline. He had logged more than 6,600 flight hours, 3,417 of them on the RJ-85. The first officer was Over Fernando Goitia, 47, also a former military aviator, certified on the RJ-85 only 5 months earlier, with just over 100 hours on type. In the jump seat was Sissy Arias, a trainee pilot. At 18:18 local time, Flight 2933 began its takeoff roll and climbed smoothly, heading toward Colombia. The atmosphere in the cabin was cheerful. Players were laughing, journalists were talking, some passengers were listening to music, and others were sleeping. The dream of the final was getting closer. The skies were clear, and the crew followed the direct flight plan toward Jose Maria Cordova International Airport, SKRG, in Medellín. The estimated flight time was about 4 hours. During the first phase of the trip, no technical or weather anomalies were reported. The aircraft cruised at flight level 300, and radio communication with Brazilian air traffic control remained normal. The crew crossed most of Brazilian territory without incident. However, no adjustments to the fuel plan were made, despite the fact that the aircraft was operating at the very limit of its endurance. Regulations require that crews always consider alternate airports, such as Bogotá, Leticia, or San Jose del Guaviare, when fuel is critical. But the crew showed no indication of diverting or requesting priority. About 180 nautical miles from Medellín, after entering Colombian airspace, the first low fuel alert appeared, the Fuel Quantity Low Level Advisory. This meant that at least one fuel tank had reached a critically low level. At that point, the crew established contact with Bogotá Control and then Medellín Approach, which assigned them the standard arrival route via the Hemley waypoint. But just as they were approaching the Rio Negro area, an unexpected delay changed everything. A Viva Colombia flight requested priority due to a possible fuel leak, forcing controllers to sequence other traffic in a holding pattern. LaMia Flight 2933, despite being in an extremely marginal situation, did not declare an emergency and accepted to enter the holding pattern. During the next 12 minutes, the RJ-85 completed 2 full holding pattern circuits, adding 50 to 60 extra kilometers to the route and consuming more fuel from an already critical supply. Tension inside the cockpit grew. At 21:49 local time, Captain Quiroga finally reported fuel problems and requested priority to land. But he still did not use the word Mayday or even the phrase fuel emergency. The controller instructed them to continue holding for another 7 minutes due to traffic ahead. 3 minutes later, at 21:52, the crew finally declared a fuel emergency, using the word emergency for the first time, but still failing to use the ICAO standard phraseology required in such situations. While the crew was still waiting for vectors, the situation on board deteriorated rapidly. The engines began to flame out one by one. Engine number 3 was the first to shut down, followed by engine number 4 shortly after. The aircraft began to lose altitude gradually at first, but as the remaining 2 engines also failed, the descent rate increased significantly. The cockpit turned chaotic. The captain desperately requested direct vectors to the runway, but radio transmissions became shorter and more disorganized, making coordination with air traffic control more difficult. Medellín ATC tried to give them direct clearance to the airport, but time had run out. At 21:55, radar contact with the aircraft was lost. The last words heard from the captain were chilling. "Vectors, Senora, vectors." At 21:59, with all 4 engines shut down, the landing gear and flaps fully extended, which increased drag dramatically, the Avro RJ-85 impacted the mountainous terrain of Cerro Gordo at 8,500 feet elevation. Only 17.7 kilometers, 11 miles, from Jose Maria Cordova International Airport. Because there was no fuel left in the tanks, there was no post-impact fire or explosion. The fuselage was heavily damaged, but many structural sections remained intact, a factor that allowed 6 people to survive the crash. When radar contact was lost, Colombian authorities immediately initiated the alert phase, which quickly escalated to a full-scale emergency. Residents of the rural area near Cerro Gordo reported hearing a loud crash, which helped rescuers narrow down the search zone quickly. Almost 3 hours later, around 00:30 on November 29th, rescue teams from the Colombian Air Force, fire brigades, police, civil defense, and army began ground operations from Rio Negro. Adverse weather, fog, and low visibility prevented helicopters from landing at the site during the night, forcing rescuers to climb through the rugged terrain on foot. One of the first people to reach the wreckage was a 15-year-old local farmer, Johan Ramirez, who guided emergency teams using the cries of survivors as reference. By 2:58, rescue teams located the main wreckage. The scene was devastating, but the absence of fire gave rescuers hope. 6 people were found alive among the debris. Alan Russell, left back for Chapecoense, conscious and still strapped to his seat. Jimena Suarez, a flight attendant, also found alive in the rear section of the fuselage. Erwin Tamiri, a flight technician, sheltered by a part of the structure that cushioned the impact. Jackson Folman, the reserve goalkeeper, seriously injured and later had one leg amputated. Neto, central defender, found hours later under the wreckage in critical condition. Rafael Hensel, a Brazilian journalist, conscious but with multiple fractures. Evacuation was extremely difficult. Rescuers had to carry survivors on stretchers through mud and dense vegetation for several hours before reaching ambulances. The solidarity of local residents was extraordinary. They provided food, water, blankets, and moral support to the rescue crews throughout the night. By morning, the tragedy had made headlines worldwide. The official investigation was led by Colombia's Civil Aviation Authority, Aerocivil, with experts from Bolivia, Brazil, the UK, and France's BEA, as the flight recorders were European-built. Investigators quickly determined this was no ordinary accident. The aircraft ran out of fuel not due to a leak or miscalculation, but because of deliberately negligent flight planning. Analysis showed the RJ-85 departed with 9,073 kilograms of fuel, near capacity but still almost 3,000 kilograms below what international rules required for this route. Destination plus alternate plus 10% reserve plus 30 minutes of holding. This was not an isolated case. LaMia regularly operated flights at the edge of their range, skipping required reserves to cut costs. Bolivian authorities failed to prevent it, approving an illegal plan that included a fictitious technical stop in Cobija. The airport was closed and no refueling was ever intended. During the flight, the crew ignored multiple chances to divert, including Bogota after the first low fuel warnings, convinced they could still reach Medellín.